The heavy stone door of the cathedral creaked open, and a shaft of light pierced the dim interior. A young woman, her face pale with fear, hurried inside, her eyes scanning the shadows. She breathed a sigh of relief when she saw the wooden statue of St. Denis, his head held high in his hands. The story of St. Denis, the Bishop of Paris, was one that had haunted her since childhood. Legend said that after he was beheaded, he simply picked up his head and walked for miles, preaching all the way until he finally collapsed and died. The statue was a reminder of the incredible will and faith that could defy even death. But today, the statue seemed different. The head, usually held firmly in St. Denis's grasp, was missing. The young woman's heart raced as she approached the empty pedestal. Where could it have gone? She knew that relics like this were more than just old bones or carvings. They were sacred objects that could bring miracles and blessings. The loss of St. Denis's head was a disaster. As she pondered, her gaze fell on a small, dusty book lying nearby. It was an old manuscript, its pages yellowed with age. She picked it up and began to read, her eyes widening as she discovered the story of another, beheaded St. John the Baptist. According to the New Testament, John was beheaded on the orders of Herodias, the wife of Herod. His head was presented on a platter, a gruesome but powerful symbol of his faith. Over the centuries, the head of John the Baptist had become one of the most sought-after relics in Christendom, with many churches claiming to possess the true relic. But the story of John's head was not just about the relic itself. It was about the power it held. In the Middle Ages, people believed that relics could perform miracles, heal the sick, and bring divine favor. Even those who couldn't access the real thing would commission artists to create intricate sculptures, like the Johannisschüssel, a wooden head of John on a platter, to venerate the saint. These sculptures were often placed on altars, carried in processions, and used in religious plays, bringing the saint's presence into the daily lives of the faithful. The young woman's mind raced as she thought about the missing head of St. Denis and the power it held. Could someone have stolen it, hoping to gain its divine favor? Or was it a sign of something more sinister, a warning of dark times to come? She closed the book and looked around the cathedral. The air was thick with the scent of incense, and the flickering candles cast long shadows on the walls. She knew she had to find the head and return it to its rightful place, but where to start? Suddenly, a faint whisper echoed through the cathedral. "Seek the light, and you will find the truth." The young woman's heart skipped a beat. She spun around, but there was no one there. The whisper seemed to come from the very walls themselves. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, determined to uncover the mystery of the missing head and the secrets it held. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows over the city. The young woman knew she had a long and dangerous journey ahead of her, but she was ready. For in the world of medieval saints and relics, faith and determination could move mountains, or at least help find a missing head. In the heart of medieval Paris, there stood a peculiar institution known as the Hôpital des Quinze Vingts, which translates to the Hospital of 1520s. This name came from its purpose, to care for 300 blind people. Founded by King Philip Augustus, this place was a mix of a religious shelter and a charitable home. Each day, the blind residents, often in groups of 3, would walk the streets, led by sighted guides, asking for alms to support their communal life. Despite their good intentions, they were often seen as a nuisance by many city dwellers. In one disturbing incident recorded in 1425, 4 blind people were placed in a park with a pig and given clubs. They were told they could eat the pig if they killed it. The crowd watched, seemingly entertained, as the blind men nearly beat each other to death. This dark episode highlights the harsh reality that even those who were meant to be cared for could be subjected to cruel treatment. However, not everyone viewed the blind with such disdain. In the Islamic world, the Mamluk Egyptian historian Khalil al-Safadi wrote extensive biographies of over 400 blind and one-eyed men who had achieved great things. These men were theologians, scholars, doctors, and poets, proving that a lack of sight was no barrier to success. In religious narratives, blindness was often seen as a test of faith. Those who endured it were thought to have a deeper, more divine perception, unburdened by the distractions of the physical world. The English mystic Marjorie Kemp, for example, spoke of the sight of her soul, a way of seeing that transcended the physical and touched the spiritual. In the Middle Ages, sensory experiences were deeply intertwined with religious and philosophical ideas. The Cluny tapestries, for instance, depict a young woman engaging with the five senses, inviting viewers to imagine themselves in the scene. When we see the woman using a mirror to reflect light onto a unicorn, we are reminded of our own sensory experiences and the luck we have in being able to see. Yet reconstructing these medieval sensory experiences is challenging. Sensory perceptions are personal and subjective, making them hard to describe or share accurately. Even if you and I smell the same rose, we can't be sure that our experiences are the same. Words like whiff, scent, puff, waft, stink, and fragrance each carry their own nuances, making it difficult to capture the exact nature of a smell. Objects from the past can help bridge this gap. For example, a gilded copper lamp from northern Italy, made in the mid-14th century, and a brass and silver incense burner from Mamluk Syria, made around 1280 to 1290, both reveal much about medieval sensory experiences. The Italian lamp, intricate and ornate, was designed to diffuse light and incense through 6 windowed openings. Biblical figures and angelic beings adorn it, suggesting its use in Christian rituals. Incense was a crucial part of medieval church practices, symbolizing sanctity and divine presence. In the life of Saint Irene of Chrysobelanton, the transformation of a horrific burning smell into a sweet, heavenly fragrance emphasized her sanctity. The lamp's design, with its detailed vines and flowers, evoked the natural world and the perfumed heavens, where the air was believed to be filled with the fragrance of holiness. The Syrian incense burner, on the other hand, was a smaller, more delicate piece. Its surface is pierced with patterns, allowing the incense to waft through. The lamp is decorated with the 7 planets, reflecting the advanced astronomical knowledge of the time. The internal mechanism, a gimbal, allowed the incense to remain lit regardless of the lamp's position, making it ideal for use during meals or travel. The sweet scents it emitted were not only pleasurable, but also believed to counteract bad air and disease. In the Islamic tradition, paradise was often described as a fragrant garden, free from the pungent smells of everyday life. The Auris, or heavenly maidens, were said to be made of perfumes like saffron, musk, and ambergris, which would have been burned in such incense burners. Teresa de Cartagena, a 15th century Spanish writer, described her deafness as a separation from the world. She could see, smell, and touch, but her inability to hear left her feeling isolated. In her treatise, The Arboleda de los Enfermos, she wrote, "I am cut off from human voices, for my ears cannot hear them. My gossiping tongue is silenced, for because of my deafness it cannot speak." Despite this, she found joy in the silence, believing it opened her to a world of sounds beyond human perception. The medieval philosopher Boethius classified sounds into 3 categories: musica instrumentalis, the sounds of instruments and voices; musica humana, the harmonies between body and soul; and musica mundana, the cosmic music of the spheres. For Teresa, her deafness allowed her to tune into the more spiritual and divine sounds, a deeper resonance that bound together the earthly and the heavenly. In this way, the sensory experiences of the Middle Ages were complex and multifaceted, reflecting a world where the physical and the spiritual were deeply intertwined. Whether through the sweet scents of incense, the harmonies of the spheres, or the trials of sensory impairment, the medieval mind sought to understand and connect with the divine in every sensory moment. Imagine stepping into a sacred space, like the magnificent Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, where the air shimmers with a unique kind of magic. Built in the 537 AD, this basilica church, later converted into a mosque, stands 184 feet tall. As you walk inside, the sound changes dramatically. The vast domed space amplifies every whisper, every step, and every note of a song, creating an otherworldly experience. In the Middle Ages, most people lived in small, uninsulated houses where sounds were dull and muffled. But in places of worship, the architecture was designed to make sounds resonate and echo, enhancing the spiritual atmosphere. One of the most influential figures of the time, Hildegard von Bingen, a German abbess and composer, believed that music was essential to the spiritual experience. She once wrote to her archbishop, "Those who without just cause impose silence on a church will lose their place among the chorus of angels." For Hildegard, the sound of music in these sacred spaces was not just beautiful, it was a gateway to the divine. The loudest and most powerful sounds in the Middle Ages often came from church bells. These large, cast bronze bells could be heard for miles, calling people to prayer and marking the hours of the day. Bells were not just practical. They were also believed to have protective powers. The ringing of a bell was thought to drive away evil spirits, and sometimes the names of saints were inscribed on the bell to extend their divine protection. For example, a bell from the mid-1200s in Assisi, Italy, bore the inscription, "I determine the Sabbath, I lament funerals, I break lightning, I rouse the lazy, I tame the cruel, I disperse the winds." Bells were so important that they were treated almost like living beings. If a bell broke, it might be buried in holy ground, just like a person. They could also be used as political tools. In 997, the Muslim ruler of Cordoba raided the Christian pilgrimage center of Santiago de Compostela. But instead of melting the church's bells for their metal, he took them as trophies and hung them in the great mosque of Cordoba. Before the 9th century, music was passed down orally with no written records. But as the centuries progressed, a system of musical notation began to develop. This allowed composers to write down their melodies, ensuring that sacred and secular music could be preserved and shared more widely. Troubadours who wrote love songs in southern France and northern Spain started to notate their music, and large choir books were created for church choirs to sing from. One unique form of musical notation was the exultet roll, a long piece of parchment used for Easter prayers. These rolls were designed to be read by a priest standing in front of a congregation. As the priest sang from the text, the scroll would unroll, revealing images that told the story being sung. The images were oriented in the opposite direction, so they appeared right side up for the congregation. This created a multi-sensory experience, combining sound and visual storytelling. The medieval mouth was seen as a two-way street. It could receive tastes and also project sounds. The way people spoke was a subject of much discussion. Different regions had distinct accents, and some were praised for their clarity and beauty, while others were criticized for their harshness or confusion. For example, the historian Ranulph Higden noted that the English language had become corrupted due to the influence of the Danes and Normans, leading to strange babbling, chattering, snarling, clicking, and grinding of teeth. Saint Anthony of Padua was known for his powerful oratory. His speeches were so captivating that people from different countries could understand him in their own languages, as if by a miracle. After his death, his jawbone was preserved as a relic, encased in a beautiful reliquary. People believed that touching or kissing relics like this could bring them closer to the divine. Icons, tomb slabs, and religious manuscripts often showed signs of wear from being kissed by devoted pilgrims. The tongue was also important in medieval medicine. If someone's tongue showed signs of illness, such as a bitter taste or discoloration, it was a sign that their body was out of balance. Medicines were often taken by mouth, and the sign of the cross was made under the tongue before swallowing. For bad breath, people might drink perfumed wine or keep a laurel leaf under their tongue. Wealthy individuals even swallowed small pieces of gold and jewels for their healing properties. Dental care was a challenge in the Middle Ages. James Le Palmer, an English author, wrote about dentistry in his encyclopedia, the Omni Bonum. He described a dentist holding a string of teeth and using pliers to remove a tooth from a patient. Despite the lack of modern tools, people tried to maintain their oral health as best they could. In these sacred spaces and through the power of sound and speech, the medieval world found ways to connect with the divine and to heal the body. Whether through the resonant echo of a cathedral, the ringing of a bell, or the careful words of a skilled orator, sound was a vital part of life and belief. In the Middle Ages, the idea of a bright, healthy smile wasn't as important as it is today. People didn't really care much about showing off their teeth, and you wouldn't see smiling faces in medieval art. However, that doesn't mean they ignored their teeth altogether. Archaeologists have found evidence that medieval people had better oral hygiene than we might think. Their diets varied a lot, which affected their teeth. For example, the rich, who ate more sugar, had more cavities, while the poor, who ate coarser bread, had more wear and tear on their teeth. Medieval dentists, who were often surgeons or specialized dentists, gave practical advice. They told people with sensitive teeth to avoid eating hot and cold foods one after the other. They also suggested rinsing the mouth with special mixtures to help with gum problems. If a tooth was really bad, it had to be pulled out. The dentists would then treat the empty space with herbs and spices, especially peppercorns, which they thought were good for the mouth. One of the most famous medieval medical practitioners was Abu al-Qasim al-Zahrawi, known in the West as Albucasis. He wrote detailed instructions on how to replace extracted teeth with prosthetics made from carved animal bones, which were then tied in place with thin gold thread. This was a way to ensure that people could still have a full set of teeth, at least for those who could afford it. The Cluny tapestries, a series of beautiful medieval artworks, show a young woman interacting with various animals. In one tapestry, she is feeding sweet berries to her parrot and monkey. If she ate too many of these berries, she might have ended up with tooth problems and had to visit a dentist like the one depicted in a 14th century encyclopedia. The dentist is shown with a set of exaggerated teeth hanging from a necklace, which might have been a bit unsettling for the patient. The sixth tapestry in the Cluny series is the most mysterious. It shows the young woman in front of a tent with the phrase "a mon desire, to my soul desire" written above it. The meaning of this phrase is still debated, but it suggests that the young woman is doing something that only she understands. The tapestry is filled with animals from the other scenes, hinting that whatever she desires involves all her senses. Moving on to the topic of skin, it was both a protective layer and a way to express identity. In the Middle Ages, people believed that skin was permeable and could absorb the environment around them. However, it was also an opaque barrier that hid the body's inner workings. One fascinating image from a medieval medical book shows a man carrying his skin on a pole. This is from Henry de Mondeville's Chirurgia, a book that aimed to elevate the status of surgery. The man is shown without his skin, with only his flesh and bones visible. The illustration is accompanied by a detailed description of the different layers of the skin and the underlying tissues. This kind of visual aid was rare for surgical texts at the time, as most detailed illustrations were reserved for religious or scholarly works. The idea of seeing inside the body was new and controversial. Most medical centers did not allow dissections because of religious and social concerns. People believed that the body needed to remain intact for the afterlife. However, in the late 13th century, some Italian cities began to allow dissections in specific cases, such as to solve medical mysteries or legal disputes. For example, in 1286, a doctor in Italy was allowed to dissect chickens and a human body to investigate a disease. This led to the discovery of a link between the disease in chickens and humans, which was a significant breakthrough. By the early 14th century, some courts were starting to accept post-mortem evidence in legal cases. In 1302, a man named Azzolino degli Unsti was found dead, and his body was examined to determine if he had been poisoned. The doctors found internal bleeding near his heart, which suggested he died naturally, not from poisoning. Despite these advances, the academic medical community was slow to change. When dissections did occur, they were often more like performances of classical texts, rather than actual exploratory procedures. The famous anatomist Mondino de Liuzzi, for example, conducted dissections to illustrate the teachings of ancient medical texts. The dissections were more about confirming what was already known rather than discovering new information. An illustration from a later edition of Mondino's work shows a typical medieval dissection scene. A cadaver is laid out on a table, and a high-ranking academic reads from a text while a surgeon makes the incisions. Most of the people present were more interested in the text than the actual body. This shows that even though dissections were becoming more common, they were still very much controlled by the academic and religious authorities of the time. Medieval people had a complex relationship with their bodies, both in terms of how they were seen and what was hidden beneath the skin. The visual and practical aspects of medicine were slowly evolving, but the old beliefs and traditions still held strong. As we delve into the world of medieval dissections, we find a blend of caution, curiosity, and a heavy dose of social tension. In the small, tightly knit communities of Italy, the annual anatomy lessons were a mix of scientific exploration and communal anxiety. These events, often held in the cooler winter months to avoid the stench of rotting flesh, were strictly regulated. The bodies, usually those of executed criminals from distant places, were seen as less controversial subjects for such intimate scrutiny. However, not all dissections went as planned. In 1319, a medical teacher named Alberto de Zancarias and his students in Bologna faced severe consequences for illegally digging up a body, shocking the town and leading to a trial that sent several students to prison. Such incidents only tightened the already stringent laws surrounding these practices. Medieval understanding of the human body was intricate, especially when it came to the skin. The skin was viewed as a double-layered protector, with an outer skin proper and an inner panicle. Together, these layers were described as tough, flexible, and highly sensitive, serving as a vital barrier against the outside world. Surgeons, who often had to cut into the skin, developed a deep knowledge of its properties. They performed amputations, removed foreign objects, and practiced bloodletting, all of which required a precise understanding of the skin's structure. By the 1400s, surgeons were also venturing into plastic surgery, using techniques from Byzantine and Indian medicine to repair damaged noses and other facial features. One famous method involved grafting skin from the arm to the nose, a process that required the patient to keep their arm bound to their face for weeks as the new skin grew. The skin's appearance was more than just a matter of physical health. It was a window into a person's moral and spiritual condition. Leprosy, with its distinctive skin lesions, was not just a physical disease but a sign of moral corruption. Sufferers were often stigmatized and feared, seen as a threat to public health and moral order. However, some voices, like that of the Byzantine theologian Gregory of Nazianzos, urged compassion and understanding, reminding people that lepers were still human beings in need of care and support. The skin also played a significant role in medieval perceptions of race. While there were occasional stories of miraculous healing that transcended racial boundaries, such as the tale of Saints Cosmas and Damian transplanting a leg from an Ethiopian man to a Roman, these were the exception rather than the norm. The Crusades, in particular, heightened racial tensions. Both Muslim and Christian propagandists used skin color to demonize their enemies. Muslim scholars like Abu al-Hasan al-Masudi described Europeans as pale, dull, and cowardly, while Christian leaders like Pope Urban II portrayed Muslims as dark-skinned, bloodless, and inherently weak. These stereotypes seeped into everyday life, influencing how people saw and treated those with different skin tones. Even when the skin was removed from the body, it continued to hold meaning. In medieval Europe, parchment made from treated animal skin was a primary material for writing and illustration. This transformed skin, now a flat, smooth surface, became a canvas for the transmission of knowledge and art. Whether it was a historical chronicle, a medical treatise, or a religious text, the pages of these books carried the stories and ideas of the time, connecting the physical world to the intellectual and spiritual realms. In the end, the skin in medieval society was more than just a biological organ. It was a complex and multifaceted layer that revealed much about the world and the people who lived in it. From the cautious dissections in the anatomy halls to the deep-seated racial prejudices, the skin was a surface that told many stories, each one reflecting the intricate and often contradictory nature of medieval life.